The West Asia conflict is expanding rapidly, with a new incident involving NATO and Turkey raising concerns of a wider war and direct involvement of NATO. A ballistic missile, it was launched from Iran. Iran denies it though, but it came in from Iran, which was intercepted by NATO air defense systems as it approached Turkish airspace after crossing Syria and Iraq. The missile was shot down over the eastern Mediterranean as it was approaching Turkey. Turkish officials say the projectile traveled through Iraq and Syria before being destroyed. The incident is significant because Turkey is a member of NATO. Under NATO's Article 5, an attack on one member can be considered an attack on the entire alliance. Member countries are obligated to come to the assistance of the attacked member, which may or may not involve the use of armed forces. It was first invoked in 2001 after the 9/11 terrorist attacks against the United States. But NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte says the alliance deliberately keeps the trigger for Article 5 ambiguous. And this was during an interview to Newsmax. Rutte said, "The uncertainty is intentional. It is designed to deter adversaries from testing NATO's resolve." He stressed that the alliance remains ready to defend every inch of NATO territory if necessary. Now, the United States has backed Turkey following the incident. Secretary of State Marco Rubio called the attacks on Turkey's sovereign territory unacceptable and pledged full American support. The conflict is also spreading beyond West Asia, with Washington claiming one of its submarines sunk an Iranian warship in the Indian Ocean. Defense Secretary for the US, Pete Hegseth, said Iranian frigate Iris Dana was hit by a torpedo while operating in international waters. Sri Lankan authorities rescued 32 sailors, but many others, they remain missing. According to the Pentagon, this was the first time since World War II that a US submarine sunk an enemy vessel with this torpedo. Leaders across the world are now being asked whether they could be drawn into the conflict. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney said Canada will stand by its allies if necessary, and added that he is not ruling out military participation in the ongoing conflict.
So one can never categorically rule out participation. We will stand by our allies when it makes sense. There's a distinction between the offensive actions that were taken and are being taken by the United States and Israel, that were taken by them without consultation with Canada, with other allies, and we're not party to those actions. But we will always defend Canadians. We will always stand by and defend our allies when called upon.
Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese said that Australian military assets have been deployed to West Asia as a contingency plan. He did not give further details, but local outlet SBS News reported that they were logistics planes for transport.
The government is deploying 6 crisis response teams to the region, and we've already deployed military assets as part of our contingency planning earlier this week. I thank those Australians who are going into a dangerous situation in order to help their fellow Australians caught up in this conflict.
All right. To discuss this further, I'm now being joined by Elizabeth Laris, Adjunct Senior Fellow at the Pacific Forum. Elizabeth, thank you so much for making time for us and joining us here on the broadcast. To start right off, what invokes Article 5 under the NATO Pact, and what more needs to happen on the battlefield at this point for Article 5 to get invoked?
When a member state of NATO is attacked or feels that it is attacked, it first invokes Article 4. And Article 4 then is a request that NATO as a whole invokes Article 5. And then that is the article that prompts coordinated action. And that is the article that indicates an attack against one is an attack against the entire alliance. So up to this point, Turkey has not invoked Article 4. In plain speak, it just means that Turkey has not invoked the NATO charter to come to its defense. And it doesn't appear that it would do so if it hasn't done so yet.
All right, I understand, Elizabeth. Now, if you just look at the damage that has been caused on sovereign American land, this is across West Asia. I'm talking about the consulates and the embassies in at least 5 locations in Lahore, Karachi, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Dubai. Now, this is an assault on US sovereignty. At this point, US is the largest contributor to NATO. Canada has said they will not rule out, getting involved if it is required. Australia has already deployed its military assets towards the region. France has deployed an aircraft carrier. A Britain base has already been attacked in Cyprus, and EU is sending more military assets in defense of the airbase in Cyprus. For the large part, a lot of the major players in NATO are already involved, US being the biggest one, which is obviously in the midst of it. Not invoking Article 5 or starting with Article 4 the way it proceeds, is that a strategic move, or is it a way to mitigate the actual damages that are taking place?
Well, right now, the United States doesn't appear to need to invoke Article 5, as you just mentioned. The big players are already involved, and Secretary of Defense Hegseth had said very clearly in a statement, I believe it was a press conference recently, that right now the United States and Israel rule the skies over Iran. Iran doesn't have any more air power. It doesn't, not an air force, it doesn't have sea power anymore after the U.S., sunk a whole host of their ships. What Iran still has is missiles. And of course, that was the reason why the negotiations, the talks in Geneva broke down, is because Iran did not want to talk about its conventional missile program. So right now, the United States feels that its defensive mechanisms can take down most of Iran's missiles. Certainly you're seeing not all. There is a sense in the Pentagon that the missile attacks are actually decreasing, that Iran at some point will run out of its missiles, and that these barrages will cease gradually.
Understood. Elizabeth, but there is a counter to that, because there are voices suggesting that Iran wants to outlast the US with its low-cost drones causing damage as they're being intercepted with high-cost interceptors, and there is no comparison to the costs. But of course, we'll need to wait and watch how this one goes on. Today is the 6th day, if I'm right, and this doesn't seem to be showing signs of reducing in intensity. When you had mentioned the Iranian ship, which was hit in international waters yesterday, and of course then a US tanker which has been hit today, and that happened just about an hour ago. Is the war now taking a more maritime domain? Does it set a new dangerous precedent where these assets are being destroyed just by the flags that are on them?
Yeah, perhaps. But, for the United States, bring it to the maritime domain, because there is no sea power greater than the United States. Even though there is a lot of bravado coming out of the Pentagon, they are not saying this is going to be short, though they are conveying a message that this is not going to be a forever war. It's going to be long and drawn out. We need to take a little bit of caution with those types of comments, because wars do get out of control. As you see, it's going to be increasingly concentrated, it appears, in the Straits of Hormuz. The United States and Israel now controls that area. Iran had said that it would only allow Chinese and Russian ships passage. Any other ships would be subject to attack. Then the United States countered and said, President Trump countered and said, we will personally, finance insurance of those ships. And so you see a concentration in that area. So yeah, that's where I anticipate there's going to be a bit more conflict.
Interestingly, Elizabeth, just yesterday, I'm just repeating it for the sake of our audiences, after Donald Trump came out with that announcement that the US Navy will offer, they will guard vessels in the Strait of Hormuz and in that region, protecting them, escorting them. Shortly after that, we heard of 10 tankers being targeted by Iran. And today we've learned that they've even targeted and struck a US tanker, a US oil tanker. So, of course, that will continue. It's a battle which is on. This is wartime. But I wanted to just go back to the attack on the Iranian warship, which was down just yesterday. There are questions over the legitimacy of the US targeting the Iranian ship. In your appreciation, was it a legitimate target?
Oh, well, now you're into really murky area. And there are plenty of people in the United States that are saying that this military action is unconstitutional because, Trump did not consult Congress. The War Powers Act of 1975 indicates that the president must first inform Congress. President Trump and Secretary of Hegseth, they say, and Secretary of State Rubio say, yeah, we informed the big eight. Those are the senators and House leadership that sit on the, select intelligence and defense committees that are privy to intelligence, okay? And so the administration is arguing that it consulted, it informed Congress, so this is not an illegal act. However, others are saying that the president is using the term war. If this is a war, only the U.S. Congress can declare war. Of course, other critics of the president worldwide are saying that this is a violation of international law, because according to international law, you have to be attacked first before you hit your adversary. Trump is arguing, go back to 1983, Khobar Towers, go back to Hezbollah, go to Iraq with the IEDs. These have all been attacks against the United States. We've actually been in a very long war with Iran, and now we are finally able to do something because the regime has been weakened because of Israel's attacks last year, the protests, the weak economy, a lot of the things that and so this is the time to actually strike.
Understood. Elizabeth, this is a question, we've even been discussing this in the newsroom. Who really, and I'm talking about which country or which power at this point or which global body has or would be eligible at this point to carry forward some kind of diplomacy or have negotiations between the warring sides? And if there is none, what are we looking at in the weeks or the months to come?
That's a good question. The United States government, of course, is always saying we have the door open for negotiations. Iran is crying foul, saying we were in negotiations and you guys essentially walked out when we wouldn't talk about the missiles, and then you closed the door. The Gulf states, Oman, the most recent discussions, the round 3 talks were held at the residence of the Omani representative in Geneva. And so, the Gulf states very well would like to be mediators and see some type of a resolution.
All right. I mean, that is something that we'll need to wait and watch, because who can really call for diplomacy at this point when you have the strongest military in the world carrying forward the war and having started the war? There is a lot of bravado coming in from the US, as you mentioned, and I appreciate, Elizabeth, you've been very honest in your replies. Thanks so much for being with us, and there will be more to discuss. Look forward to having you with us again.